This verse is out of Psalms, chapter 91, verses 1 and 2. This is pretty near and dear to my heart for a lot of different reasons, especially throughout my football career, but most importantly, my spiritual walk with the Lord. It says this. It says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust." And really for me, there's a big correlation for this, man, because as an athlete, there's so many things that you can trust in, right? And this verse really strips to the heart of really a person as a Christ follower or somebody who's trying to walk with the Lord. You see, there's so many times when I'm out on the football field or as I go through life that I feel the weight of everything bearing down on me, whether I'm not good enough, whether I'm not great enough. And for me, my inclination is to rest in who I am, rest in myself. And this verse is really pushing us toward resting in who Jesus is. And as you can imagine, the psalmist here is writing, and these people would understand this really well because in the Middle East, it was a really dry, arid, really temporal, really hot place for these people. And there was no air conditioning. The streets were made of mud. The houses were straw and brick and mortar and different things. So these people really were always being oppressed by the sun and the heat that bear down on them. And so if you can imagine, these people lived in kingdoms, right? And so as these people were in kingdoms, they had a king. And if you had a good king, the king was a big, vast, strong presence for them. And the reality is that the king was supposed to provide shelter and comfort for his people. And so just like our King Jesus, who is big and vast and strong, you see, just as these people, in a metaphor, would try to get out of the suppression and the oppression from the heat, how they would try to find shelter in something to give them some sort of reprieve. In the same way, we as Christians, as people walking through this world with the oppression and the different things that are beating down on us, we're trying to find something that we can find shelter in to get us out of the difficulties and the abrasiveness of life and all the things that come with it. And so, as the psalmist says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty." You see, if there was a big, strong king and he was a good king, the king would cast a shadow over the whole land of his people, and his people could rest in his shadow, in comfort and in safety and in refuge. And just like us as people, more applicably, the heat, the sun isn't our oppression, the world is our oppression. And so for us to find shelter in this world and in the difficulties of it, if we can find the shelter and rest in who Jesus is, we can find that peace and that joy and that happiness that only comes through him, that refuge and that fortress, that God in whom we can trust.